On this episode of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, we are chatting with our friend and colleague, Laurie Browne, who is the head of research for the American Camp Association. We can't wait for the conversation that Jake and I have with her today. Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, where we turn numbers into stories and data into insights. We dive deep into theology and research, paired with practical wisdom and action steps to help camping ministries thrive. I'm your host and producer, Jared Rendell, a camp enthusiast and part of the Sacred Playgrounds team. This podcast features Dr. Jake Sorensen, a scholar, author, practitioner, and the founder of Sacred Playgrounds. Be sure to subscribe, submit a question to us to be featured on the podcast, and click that support button to help make these episodes happen. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Sacred Playgrounds or at sacredplaygrounds.com. Wonder with us what God might have in store at your sacred playground. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the playground, everyone. Yes, the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Here we are with friends today. It's going to be an exciting episode. You'll hear my voice a lot less, and Jake and our friend Laurie Browne, who will introduce herself in just a second, is with us today. So we've got a great conversation to be had with her. So yeah, that's what we're doing today. We're going to hear from Laurie Browne. We're going to share some of what's going on in camp research and kind of a broader picture, and give you a chance to wonder and connect some of these things for yourself in your own context. So Laurie, thank you for joining us. Would you just share your name, share your role, tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself quick?
Sure. Thanks, Jared. Thanks, Jake. I'm so glad to be here. Hi, everybody. My name is Laurie Browne. I'm the Director of Research and Education at the American Camp Association. I am about to round out my 8th year in that role with ACA, but I was a longtime volunteer prior to that, and of course, a camp director, a camp counselor, and a camper. I'm working my way backwards for all those years. I'm excited to bring all of that into our conversation today.
Awesome. We're so grateful to have you join us. Now, so Jake and Laurie have known each other for a while now as leaders and, again, practitioners in the world of camp research. And Laurie is helping us out with the Rhythms of Faith project. And so there's just a handful of connections, and we've thought for a long time about having you join on here. So we're grateful.
And I've
again.
hoped for a long time I could join you.
Awesome. All right. So we are going to dive into that here in just a second. Before we do that, like we often do, we've got our quick camp question for the week.
Quick camp question.
All right. Here we go. So this question comes from Amanda Palmer. Laurie didn't even get to hear this question in advance. So you said you were okay going with the flow, and so we're making you go with the flow. Because I put out there just even a little while ago, hey, what's your question? If you could talk to someone who is heading up something like research for the ACA, what would you ask? All right. So here's a question from Amanda Palmer. This came in on Facebook. Your biggest tip for training staff this summer on aligning their practices with the organization's values. Your biggest tip on training your summer staff to align their practices, their way of being, the things that they do with your organization's values. If your gut reactions to that, Laurie, you've been a camp director, like you said, a camper, and obviously connected to camp in a lot of ways. How do we connect for our summer staff, their practices with the organization's values?
Well, gosh, I would say go talk to my friend and colleague, the soon-to-be Dr. Amanda Palmer. She did a lot of research in that area and probably knows more than I do. But it's such a good question, and I think one that camps are asking a lot about. And what I hear at the heart of that question is about buy-in. How do we get our staff to really embody the mission of the organization, our goals for our campers? And I think really that's it. It's about embodiment. It's about far more than just training. It's about getting that shared belief with your staff. And one way to do that is to invite them in as partners in how we share this belief together. I think camp staff, our staff training, and I did this for years and years, is very often one directional. We're telling our staff what to do. We have limited time. We need them to know the basics. Here you go. But if there's a way to step back and ask staff into an opportunity to build shared vision around your mission and the goals for the summer, then you have that buy-in. And that can be as simple as, what does this mean
Mm-hmm.
to you? I say we have these words in our mission. What do those words mean to you? What about those words brought you here? And what about those words can you bring to life at camp? So really inviting them in as partners in kind of what that mission is going to look like for us this summer. That's what I would say. But again, I would direct it right back to Amanda Palmer, who's doing amazing in that
All right,
area.
Amanda. Amanda, if you're listening, then go back to your question on Facebook and tell us all the things. Jake, let me kick this your way for a second too, as well. Similar question, just to see if you have some thoughts to add on. This speaks a lot to, and like Laurie was talking about the agency thing that we brought up more than once, right? Where they get to join and own in these things. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that question as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Laurie said in terms of inviting them in as co-participants and
Yeah.
really inviting them into the story of camp. And so making sure that they understand what the philosophy of the camp is. What is the mission? What are the core values? What do you really stand for? What are we trying to do and accomplish together? We start with those sorts of things, and then we can brainstorm together. How might that look this summer in this specific situation? Because it gets very contextual, it gets very on the ground for these summer staff members. So we want to take these big concepts, these core values, this philosophy, and we want to bring it down to ground level and say, when you're talking to a fifth grader who's in this particular situation, what does this look like? What does it look like in this specific instance of conflict among campers or among staff people? And I think doing some of those contextual pieces and role playing sometimes, but case studies as well, can really help them contextualize and understand how this big concept of a core value or philosophy can really be translated onto the ground. And so, absolutely agree with Laurie in terms of inviting them into that partnership and giving them that agency.
Can I add
So it
one other
sounds.
thing too?
Go
Is
ahead, Laurie.
just quickly, we do have some research emerging about the limits of staff training, and this is really the limits of what a human can learn in a certain amount of time. And one of those limits is limits around the abstract. So, that is a very abstract thing, a philosophy, a core value, a mission. That's an abstract thing. And for a young staff person, particularly one who might not have grown up at that camp or worked at camp before, they don't have a context to apply that to. And yes, role playing and scenarios and case studies, excellent. And I would highly encourage that in staff training, but it's only once they've begun to have the experience that they have a context to apply that to. So this is a perfect opportunity to come back to something in weekly staff meetings, or if you can do just little tune-ups, little staff training tune-ups throughout the summer, and keep coming back to that mission and how is that showing up for you in your work at this camp.
Love it. Thank you, guys.
It's been so great to partner with Laurie over the last few years in terms of research, partnering together at the research forum at ACA and having different conversations. It's been really fun. We've collaborated on a couple of writing projects over the years, and now some research projects as well, which I'm really excited to have Laurie on board. The Rhythms of Faith project, and just to have you here today is such a treat. So thank you for being with us. And not everybody knows your story and where you come from, so give us a sense. We all have our story of how we came through camp, and so what's your camp background? What's your camp story?
Oh, well, this could be many, many podcasts because these are my favorite stories to tell. So I'll try and stay brief. I was transformed at camp. I became who I am at camp. And like so many of us who have chosen a career in camp, I think that I can say that most of who I am, I can tie back to camp. I grew up outside of Chicago and attended a camp in northern Wisconsin that a lot of young people in my area attended. It's called Honey Rock Camp. And what's funny about how and why I got to Honey Rock, my parents will now say they don't really know. I think they heard of it through a friend. We really did not have an affiliation with, say, Wheaton College at the time. So I ended up at Honey Rock, and it changed my life. And I was at Honey Rock as a camper for 5-ish years, and then went up through their kind of their assistant counselor track. And really found a couple things about myself. One is that I am best when I'm out in the world learning and doing through experience. And that really set in motion what I chose to study in college. Um, it also told me that I like to do really hard things. I don't know if
Mhm.
any folks who are listening know about Honey Rock, especially Honey Rock back in the 90s. There was definitely a philosophy of no pain, no gain. But that really has translated into my personal life and certainly my work, that I do believe that the best learning, the best growth comes through hard work. And by hard work, I don't mean miserable work. I just mean deep, thick, maybe long time complex work and thinking. And I'm grateful for Honey Rock to learning that. I also became a Christian at Honey Rock, and I'm very vocal about that. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to, come to know Jesus in that context, where I was surrounded by my peers and the Northwoods of Wisconsin. The nature component is very powerful of my story. I think I connected to God through nature and continue to seek the divine in that way. So that's my camper story.
Yeah.
I did not go on to work at Honey Rock, though. I found through a friend that I knew at Honey Rock a different camp in the area called Clearwater Camp for Girls, and it's literally about 45 minutes away from Honey Rock in Northwoods, Wisconsin. But early in college, that's where I started my camp counselor journey, where I just continued to layer on everything that I was learning about myself, what I had to contribute to the world, and the power of camp in my own life. I think that's where it really became clear to me that I had something to give and something to gain by being in camp for my life. My passion at Clearwater was the wilderness component. So really got to find myself as a leader. Clearwater is a camp for girls, so taking girls out into the outdoors and experiencing their own growth and their own just amazement as they discovered who they are, how powerful they are, all the gifts that they have, especially applied in a wilderness context. Fun story: I met my husband and partner at Clearwater Camp. We got married at Clearwater. And I think the funnest part of that story is I now have the great gift of serving on Clearwater's board of directors. So grateful for the opportunity to now apply what has become my career to the camp context in a really meaningful way. And with that, I get to go back to the Northwoods. I no longer live in the Midwest. I'm out west in Salt Lake City. Been here over 20 years. But I send my kids back to camp in the Northwoods of Wisconsin, because once you get that vision of what camp is, you really can't break it. And for me, like I said, camps was the outdoor piece. So lakes and forests and canoes. And so my kids had to have that experience, and they still go back to camp. They attend Manitouish Camp in northern Wisconsin. I will say, just very briefly, I was a camp director just long enough to say that I was a camp director. It is maybe the proudest part of my camp history, but also the hardest part of my camp history. And that's
Truth.
something that I tell camp folks all the time, that the respect I have for camp directors is just profound. It is such a challenging job, and I had the opportunity to learn that for 4 years. I don't know if I would have lasted much longer. I had, it was a challenging role for me, but as the divine often does, I found a different path through then academia, and so went on
Hmm.
to then teach classes at a university related to camp, and then continue my academic career related to research, and then that ultimately found me to ACA, or brought me to ACA.
Wow, what
The
a
rest is
what a
history, as
rich story and rich experiences that you bring to this role and to our conversation today. Thank you for taking a little bit of time and being vulnerable about some of those experiences and your spiritual journey through those things as well. Really appreciate that, and so fun to hear all of your camp bona fides. I mean, my goodness, as a as a camper, as a staff person, as a director, as somebody who met their spouse at camp. Um, and on camp boards and all these things, you've really done a lot in this field, and so uh, wonderful to hear your story and your background. So thank you so much for sharing about that.
Let me
And
share it. We
yeah,
can talk
absolutely,
about that as often as I like. Yeah.
it's one of those things where we sometimes just take it for granted, and it's like everybody's individual story really does matter. And so hearing that from you is really powerful. So thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
so now you're at ACA,
Mhm.
and you've got this wonderful sounding role, director of research. It sounds um, like it's a lot of things that you probably do. Could you describe a little bit for our listeners? First of all, give us a sense of ACA and what your role is there and research in general at ACA.
Sure. And I'm really glad for that question, Jake, because ACA, the American Camp Association, is an old, very legacy-like organization that is most commonly known for its accreditation program. And, that really is its probably most visible role in the camp industry. Accreditation, for folks who don't know, is a program, and it's an educational program for camps to continually kind of seek, identify, implement, and then improve areas of health, safety, and risk management. And it's a massive program that affects a lot of camps and really is of value to the industry. It's also not all that we do. And so
Hmm.
I'm always grateful for the opportunity to tell people that we at our core are an educational organization. And actually I should say an educational association. And that's important because an association means that we're really just a hub for the camp community broadly defined. And so that includes professionals, camps as organizations, network leaders, partners in other spaces like out of school time, like faith-based organizations, right? So we really like to see ourselves as part of a wheel, where we, for the work we do, we might be at that center, but we know that there are lots of wheels with lots of hubs. And so we just try and spoke out and connect to those hubs the best we can. The metaphor I like to use more and more about our work, recognizing the power of people and people when they gather, is that ACA is the water cooler around which people gather.
Mm,
And
love
I,
that.
I, as the director of research, and then having, a direct, tie between research and education, we don't say that we have the answers necessarily. We have evidence through research that then we, interpret with people and people across different contexts. And then with those people think, okay, what does this mean for the field? And then we seek out thought leaders and experts and other people that might be able to bring us educational resources, thought leadership to bring those recommendations, that evidence to bear in the field. And that's what I mean, that we're really more of the water cooler, provide the gathering place. Like maybe a better metaphor is the campfire,
The
the
campfire. There you
gathering
go.
place for folks. And then, really try to be the engine in the background that really harnesses all this great thinking and doing in the field, learn about it in a rigorous evidence-based way, and then turn that right back out into a way that the entire field can learn and grow from whatever that is. That all sounds very abstract. The one thing I'd like to say is, as a director of research, I do very little, if not zero, research anymore. I do a lot of talking about research. I do a lot of gathering and convening. I am surrounded by amazing researchers at institutions, at camps, at network organizations around the country. Jake, you are one of them. And so
Thank
that
you.
is really the best part of my job, is being part of a community of research folks, of camp folks that are really committed to learning, to harnessing expertise in the field, and then turning that right back around into learning opportunities that are accessible, that are relevant, that are evidence-based for the camp industry.
It's fantastic. You and I, we're building our careers around research related to camping ministry or camp, and specifically camping ministry for me. But you know, we think about this as something that is established now, but 20, 25 years ago, that wasn't the case. I mean, it's amazing to think about how far research has come. So, and ACA has really been a leader in this. And so I want to commend ACA for really putting this research impetus out there in the camping field, and providing some scaffolding for the rest of us to build upon. But give us a sense of where this research came from, or how ACA really got interested in research, and a little bit of that history.
Yeah, it's a really good question. First of all, camp research goes all the way back to the 30s and 40s. Camp as
Right.
an industry goes back to the turn of the century, and it wasn't long after that folks were beginning to recognize the educational developmental benefits of camp. And there are published books and peer-reviewed journals dating back to the 30s and 40s, which, and I know we're going to come back to this, most often point to things like character. Again, the educational developmental outcomes of camp. At ACA, however, a couple leaders ago, some folks might remember Peg Smith, who is the CEO of the American Camp Association many, many years ago, maybe even 12, 15 years ago, really saw the need for what I've been told is a research environment. Within
Hmm.
this hub that ACA continues to provide, we need to have a research dimension to that. And so Peg tasked at the time Marge Scanlon, whose title I don't exactly know, and I should know this, to really cultivate what is a research environment at ACA. And so one thing that Marge did quickly after that is tapped Dr. Deb Oleski, who is my great friend and mentor, to be ACA's director of research. And Deb had come out of UNC Chapel Hill, so very strong academic background, and so really brought that scholarly flavor to how we do research. And that's really, really important, and not without some tension. At our core, and again, this isn't me, this goes back to Peg and Marge and Deb, who really made a commitment to research in the scholarly sense, meaning that we need lots of checks on bias, bias in terms of how we are identifying our questions, how we are identifying, choosing our methods, how we're sharing about outcomes. We recognize that we can't be the ones doing that research. We're way too excited about camp. Like, my story is so powerful, I can't be the one out there trying to tell other people that that's everybody's story. So, I feel really grateful to be in a position to continue to steward what I think is this ethos around research, that research, has to be, rigorous. It has to be, all the checks on bias that we can have more and more. And I think this is a new set of tools and language that we're getting in research. It needs to be participant driven, community driven. I think as researchers, we're learning more and more to get out of the way and not just be the ones, going into the petri dish and poking things and then going out and making these grand claims. I think we're really learning the power of participatory action research, of research that really empowers the people that are most affected by that research. So that's another really core part of our ethos as we continue to grow and steward this research environment at ACA. Now, I said there was a little bit of tension. I hope it's okay that I mentioned that, and that, we're in an interesting time when it comes to both institutions and information.
Mm-hmm.
And, so there have, whereas we have this commitment, and we'll always have this commitment to scholarly research, Jake, this as well as I do, scholarly research doesn't always end up with like big, exciting ta-das.
Right.
It very often takes a long time and can be very frustratingly nuanced. And so I'm finding more and more that we don't have to convince people of the value of research. I did it when I started this work. I really had to say, no, don't worry, we're nice. We're okay. Research is okay. Don't have to do that. People have a high aptitude for research. But what we now need to educate around is the limits of research, and that, research is one input for how we tell stories. And it's a strong tool, but at best it's still a tool that human beings are using. So it's always going to have those limits of, human imagination and bias and, and kind of that emotional reaction to what we find or don't find. Right. So I find more and more in my work that I'm having to really kind of educate people on how to be good consumers and users of research, that it takes time. It can be sticky. It can be messy. It can be frustrating. We didn't get what we wanted, and that's okay. That doesn't mean we stop.
That's great. I really like how you painted that picture, because we have turned that corner, I think, because we're still in some cases, we're still trying to justify the need for research, but mostly folks like Deb and others have crossed that bridge for us and have really set us up to now bring research to a new level where people are saying, but tell me what I want to hear, or so there's always that concern when I'm working with individual camps. It's like we might uncover something that is uncomfortable, or we might find that the impacts that we think we're having, we're not necessarily having to the extent that we think we are, and so what does this now mean?
Or at least in terms of how we're trying to measure it.
For sure,
that's the thing about human beings, is that we're really kind of weird sacks of jelly. It's really hard to go in and
it's very flattering.
look
Thank you.
Of that sack of jelly and say, this is what's happening for this human being. So from a research point of view, we can only do so much to really understand a human being's experience, and then to make meaning across lots of human beings in order to say, camp does this. We do the best we can, but our methods are only so good. And that's part of the excitement for me, part of the continual challenge.
This is great. I love reminding people that they are sacks of jelly And then that's
Nothing
a
makes you
great
feel
time to
better,
bring in the
but
gospel,
well,
though. But God loves you, you know?
we are beloved sacks of jelly.
That's fantastic. We're gonna quote you on that. Uh, so so Laurie, one of the great research projects that has just been completed in the last year or two is this big youth impact study. So excited about the findings from this. We've been trying to share some of the findings, but love to hear it from you and love to promote these new findings that we have from this study. So give us a sense of what the youth impact study is. Um, what did you try to do? And then we're going to get to some of the findings as well because we want to definitely
Sure.
focus on those main findings. But give us an overview of the study.
Yeah, the youth impact study was really a follow up to the original outcome study that was conducted in the early 2000s.
The
And I always
directions
need to
study, that one.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And I need to point to that. And that is still a very relevant, highly referenced study because it was the first of its kind to really demonstrate on a national scale what I say are the outcomes of camp. And those outcomes were things like friendship skills, responsibility, independence, curiosity, spiritual well being among faith based camps. I mean, it was really affirming again, going back to what folks have been saying since the 30s and 40s, but really documented it again in a highly rigorous and national scale. And so um, the that original outcome study really set in motion, I think, really codified this research environment. It was really the first kind of output of that effort to create a research environment. But it left one big gaping wide open question, and that was, do those outcomes last?
Mm,
There were some attempts to capture, kind of 6-month follow up. But again, because we're dealing with human beings, and in that case, that study was collecting data from campers and staff and parents and camp directors. The data were a little, those follow up data were a little wonky. And there wasn't, I mean, that wasn't the kind of the focus of the study. So, in some cases, we actually found declines in outcomes at 6 months, but really at that time, those were not, elevated as, this is the major finding. The major finding was, camp does great things for kids. Another way we said, use that study was to say, camp is a developmental context. And that continues to be a powerful thing to say. But that question remained: does this stuff last? Is camp a one-off, literally out there in the woods somewhere, or does it last? And so that's what the impact study really set out to do. And this goes back to about 2015 ish, when my predecessor Deb at the time really started conceptualizing what is called a longitudinal study. To really understand if outcomes last over time, we need the ability to track young people over time. And Jake, this from a methodological point of view, longitudinal studies are really hard because it goes
super hard.
back to
Yep.
these humans that, gosh darn it, are like continually moving and don't answer their phones and being human. And so, the study really was designed with that in mind. This is actually right where I came into ACA, is kind of on the heels of this study being confirmed and funded. And so it was really my first professional experience of taking a set of research questions and then taking that through the entire research process. That process began with identifying a third-party research partner. There was an RFP, and that partner were our friends at the University of Utah that we've continued to do tremendous amounts of research with. But what they conceptualized in terms of a study design was actually really interesting, because not only did it have that longitudinal component, so tracking campers over time, but it also included what we call a retrospective component, right? So going to kind of, 18 to 25-year-olds, so arguably still young people, but asking them to reflect back on their childhood camp experiences and how those experiences are now affecting them in their lives. And we actually started with that piece because
Yep.
one is young campers, if anyone has worked with young children or has young children, are not the best sources of information. You ask them how their day was and they're like, it was fine. That's not all that helpful. What we knew is that we needed this older population who have the ability to reflect back on their life and the ability to articulate those findings. So we started with several different samples of 18 to 25-year-olds and asked them in different ways what they learned at camp, how they're using it now in their lives, and then what actually happened at camp to help them learn those things. And that section really then set the groundwork with what became the longitudinal section. But really, we learned is that, according to 18 to 25-year-olds reflecting back on their lives, yep, they learned pretty much the same things that we had identified in that original outcome study, things like relationship skills and independence. There was a new theme that I'll drop here, and then maybe we can revisit later, that the research team really wrestled with, but ultimately named being present in the moment. So
Hmm.
18 to 25-year-olds were reflecting back and say, yeah, actually at camp, I really learned how to be present. I really learned how to disconnect. Technology really wasn't the thing. So don't jump there, because remember, these were 18 to 25-year-olds 5 or 6 years ago. So technology wasn't nearly as much of a thing for them as it might be now. But this like being present thing was curious. And so that's another thing we tracked throughout the study. We did in fact find that, from that sample, that what they learned at camp did help them thrive in school and college and early careers, mainly in terms of, again, relationship skills and independence and resilience and curiosity, and some of these outcomes that we've known for a while. So to be able to say that now we know that not only do camp outcomes last over time, but they are transferred to these other settings was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So what we did then is use those outcomes that these 18 and 25-year-olds identified for us, and then brought that to a group of campers. At that time, they were 9 and 10-year-olds. And the idea was that we knew we wanted to track them for 3 years. So we needed an age range that they were likely to continue in their camp journey for at least 3 years. We recruited them through a sample, kind of a randomly selected sample of ACA accredited camps, but the study really wasn't about those camps. The study was about those young people and their journey through camp. Over those 3 years, as you might imagine, some went to the same camp every 3 years, some went once and never again, some went to a whole smattering of camps, and oh yeah, there was a pandemic in the middle of all that, so
Right.
that provided an interesting moment. But what we did is we talked to those young people with their parents and caregivers, by the way, because we also wanted that perspective about what they're learning, how they're using it in school, but also digging a lot deeper into this idea of what was actually going on at camp. What about camp was helping you learn these things? And we had the outcomes pretty well established, but we really hadn't unpacked what so many of us call the magic of camp. Like, what
Right.
is that magic? What's going on? And so, over the course of 3 years, talked to young people and their families, lots of different measures of outcomes and how they grew and changed over time. And lo and behold, the outcomes that last are largely the same outcomes that we've been identifying, now for a couple decades. But the real upshot is the how. For the first time, we got an understanding of what actually happens. And at camp, and for camp folks, this is still relatively affirming, but for the first time, we can say that it's the peer-based relationship opportunities at camp, the opportunities to develop relationships with meaningful or near peer adults. Think of
Hmm.
camp counselors as near peer. They're not so old that young people don't connect with them. Opportunities to try new things, and particularly things that are of interest, so experiential learning, and opportunities for reflection and learning. Really. So this really gave us what we now call the ingredients or the mechanisms, like the how, what actually happens at camp. And then we were able to determine that for young people that reported high levels of those things, meaning those were their camp experiences, they had the strongest and most kind of transferable skills when we asked them about how they're using these things in school. Right. So
So
the big upshot.
this is a really robust study that we're talking about here. So you did a lot of steps here. You had a lot of things in the pot that you said, okay, what are we looking at here? How are we looking at this? And you divided up all these different variables, and you came up with these new constructs of how do we understand these outcomes that we already knew were happening, and now we can confirm that these outcomes are lasting longitudinally. And here are some of the mechanisms, and some of those key mechanisms you said were these relationships at camp, so that camp is
Mhm,
relational, that
mhm,
they're new things, so it's different from home,
mhm.
and that these are participatory things.
Yep.
And so, three of the big fundamentals that we've talked about at Sacred Playgrounds um, in terms of the camp experience. And so, these are awesome findings. And so, give me a sense now. Like you were transitioning now, so you're talking about this big study. Now, what are these big takeaways? What are the key findings for that our camp directors can really take away from this?
Yeah, the key finding here is key, and not all one that everyone likes to hear, because the
Hmm,
other thing that we looked at was dosage. Now, dosage is
okay.
kind of hard in camps because how to measure the number of days that a kid attends camp, that changes. But we did our best to really explore like how much camp does it take to achieve these outcomes. And what we found was that the qualities that we named as the mechanisms of camp, the extent to which they felt, connected to others, a sense of belonging, opportunities for experiential learning, that was the strongest predictor of lasting outcomes, more so than time spent at camp.
This is
So the
huge.
take, yeah, it really is huge. You know, well, we can talk about the history of length of time at camp all you want, but we've seen a trend for sure in shorter and shorter sessions, and we've wondered if that's okay.
Hmm.
Is if camp is so great, more has to be better, right? Well, actually, we found out that it's the quality of the experience, not the length of the experience, that predicts outcomes. I think this is really good news. One is we do know that shorter sessions are far more accessible for families, and then two, when we think about reaching new communities and communities that we haven't been able to engage in camp, might be a few days at camp is sufficient to achieve, the outcomes that we're aiming to achieve. And so quality is the strongest predictor of outcomes, not dosage.
This is fascinating. And so, I mean, some of the learnings for our camp directors, because so many of us are saying, I mean, one of the key factors that we can say shows that camp is influencing kids is if they want to come back, right? I mean, that's one of the key things that we're trying to do is get them to come back year after year after year and make this part of their experience. And what you're saying is that's not necessarily what we should be aiming for. It's not necessarily doing camp more, it's doing camp better.
Absolutely.
And so
Um,
if we can help directors lean into these important characteristics and these important best practices, camp quality, that is how we're going to have the biggest impact on these young people.
it's true. And I want to say that, of course, we found the opposite to be true. When a young person does not have a quality experience, there are negative outcomes.
Ooh,
And to my, specifically, outcomes related to school. Now, we didn't measure academic outcomes. We didn't have grades or anything
okay.
like that, but we did measure sense of belonging in school, and some of the same factors that we're looking at camp, we looked at in school. And when a young person felt a sense of belonging at camp, they're more likely to feel that at school. And then the opposite was also true. And I can't imagine a more clear call to action for camp directors. We have the opportunity to do incredible good and also do harm. If
Mm,
a young person does not have a quality experience, they're leaving camp with that imprinted on them. And so the quality piece is important, both because it's exciting. We know what to do with quality. We know how to do quality, but also we have to take it seriously.
that's great. I really appreciate this insight. And this is such an important finding for us. Yes, we do have an impact. And in order to have the most positive impact, we got to work on quality. And so that's an important finding. Was there another finding that you wanted to share from the youth impact study?
Yeah, and I just hinted at this, and I don't want to, this is kind of an entirely new podcast and a huge area of our work right now, is that we did indeed find a relation between a quality camp experience and a quality school experience. Now,
Okay.
again, we didn't measure grades. That is really, really almost impossible to do. What we did was measure the quality of the school experience through the eyes of the camper and their parent slash caregiver. But from
Okay.
those perspectives, there was a direct relation between camper experiences and outcomes and school, student experiences and student outcomes. So really exciting, more than, being able to say that camp helps school. I believe it does. I think the more exciting story in here is that camp is part of an ecosystem. This is the first time
Yeah.
we've been able to demonstrate a direct kind of mutually beneficial relationship between two incredibly powerful contexts in a young person's life. Those contexts work together. And this is a new lexicon that we're really using more and more in youth development, and that is the ecosystem. Understand that
Yep.
young people learn everywhere they go. And the more that we as the grown-ups can create connections across these places, the better young people will learn. So this was our first time to say, yep, camp and school, they're related. Now let's figure out how to do that better.
This is great. I mean, the partnership piece is such an important piece that we've been talking about at Sacred Playgrounds, and of course,
Mhm.
we do connect with schools and with families. But one of the big partnerships that we talk about is partnerships with congregations and with churches. And
Yes.
so, what does that look like, and how can we better partner with these other spaces in order to impact the whole child?
Well, that's why I'm so excited about Rhythms of Faith, because it takes that concept now and is not only going to explore it, but determine how to do that with congregations and families. And then let's do it again. Let's look at after school programs. Let's look at sport. Let's look at all the different places that young people learn. But, Rhythms of Faith really is the next step. Now we see this relationship with school. Let's figure that out, in this case with congregations and families.
Well, I'm excited about that project too. So we only have a little bit of time left. So, is there was there one other, or was there any other findings that you want to make sure that we hit?
I want to land there, really direct people to several resources we have on our website, including the
Great.
full report. We did an entirely parallel study on camp staff. We could talk about that for a long, long time.
Yeah.
The upshot of what we found about staff is that those outcomes, the transferability of working at camp is almost identical to camper outcomes.
Mm.
So affirming, I think, what we've come to understand that staff are participants and recipients of the experience as much as campers.
That's great. And, a reminder to our listeners too that the Christian camping industry was involved in this study, especially in that phase two that you were talking about, that retrospective study. There was that oversample of Christian camps through Outdoor Ministries Connection, or OMC. And so
Mhm.
we saw some specific outcomes related to the Christian camp experience. And so saw the same outcomes that Laurie was talking about, and also alongside of those outcomes related to faith and engagement in Christian community and things like that. So, um,
Yeah.
just a reminder that Christian camps are part of this milieu. This isn't a secular camp study. ACA covers the entire camp industry, and so we're so grateful for that partnership and these findings. So, Lori, what's next? I mean, this is such an exciting project. So okay, where can we go to learn more about this particular project and these findings first?
Sure. And I'm sorry I don't have the URL. I'm sure you can find it and put it in the show notes. But the ACA website, we have a full research report. We have a summary report, what we call the digestible version for normal folks like myself. And then for the scholarly people, there's an annotated bibliography. We had over, close to 30 peer-reviewed publications spin off of this. And getting back to that ethos of research, reminder that we're really committed to research that is peer reviewed. That's one of the key checks we have, that the research is actually good and that you
Yep.
can believe it. And so the sheer volume of research that came off of that is now published is really, really important. So if there are any students out there, folks doing research, that annotated bibliography is a great place to go to find those publications and find really short summaries of what, kind of what each article is about.
That's great. And so this study is completed. We've got the report. There's more stuff going on. You're staying busy. I heard a rumor that there was a big grant or something like that. Do you want to make a quick plug so that people hear about what's happening there?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, in a nutshell, the Lilly Endowment, a longtime funder of ACA work, has funded the American Camp Association to do character. And I'm not going to say a lot more about how we're doing character because it's very broadly defined. Going back to the fact that camps have been doing character for a long time. Really the goal here is to grow, improve, and elevate character development at camp. recognizing that for some camps, that's going to mean starting new character programs. For others, it's just improving what they're already doing. And for all of us, it's really elevating and celebrating and making sure that the communities we're serving are participating, understanding, and using these character benefits. Always important to recognize that character is defined by the communities that are being served and the camps that are serving those communities. We're not telling you how to define character. There is one nice definition I always like to use. This comes from characterlabs.org that says
Uh-huh.
that character are the intentions and actions that benefit ourselves and others. So it's essentially, doing good stuff. But what
Yeah.
good is defined by time and place. And so we're not here, ACA is not here to tell camps how to do character. We're here again to provide that water cooler around which people can gather and think about what character means for their communities, how they're going to do it, how they're going to do it better. Yeah. So the Character Camp Initiative includes a grant program. We'll be granting out about $26 million to camps over the next 4 years of waves. The entire project is 6 years. But with that, there'll be research opportunities, educational opportunities, and lots of gathering opportunities for camps to come together and really think about what character means to them. In fact, Jake, you were part of a conversation recently with our faith-based camp Kindred group. And some folks asked, well, can we get together with our denominations and really strategize, how we want to do character together, and maybe apply for grants together or independently, but at least have a shared vision for how to use this initiative to further their own character related goals. I think that is just magic. With respect to research, of course, we're going to be putting a big old lens on this and trying to understand what we can. The opportunity here stemming from our impact study now is to take this connection between quality and outcomes. In this case, there'll be character related outcomes, but taking that to scale. And for real researchy folks, we might even be able to do some kind of experimental work, right? Where we have some camps implementing, say, a staff training and others not, and then looking at the effects of that. So be looking more for, again, sort of this idea, this linkage between quality and outcomes throughout the next several years.
This is great. So we can get involved in this. Camp directors can get involved in this, individual camps, and then maybe even associations of camps can get involved. There's
Absolutely.
money available, and we always encourage you participate in the research, folks. When you get those links and we say, please participate in the research, we need your participation. In this case, there's also money involved, which is very exciting. But we need everybody's participation to gather the best research that we can for the entire industry. So, Laurie, this has been such a great conversation. Of course, we will continue this conversation, but I'm sad that it has to end for our listeners. But we're gonna, of course, keep in communication through Rhythms of Faith and through the other collaborations that we have. So I so appreciate the partnership that we've enjoyed, and I hope that we can continue that into the future. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Such a lovely conversation as always, and one of many that I get to have with you, Jake. I'm so grateful for that.
Laurie, before we let you go, you get to share our stat of the week.
Stat of the week. Stat of the week. Stat of the week.
Our stat of the week this week. That was my kids, by the way.
I love it.
We're all on video here. Everybody laughing at the voiceover. I said, "Kids, I need your help." So you, you're constantly doing good research work. There was one interesting thing you shared with us that is like hot off the presses here. So share what you've learned with us.
Yeah, not even off the press, but about
You're
to go
right.
to press.
It's not even off the press.
About to go to press, and I am so excited because so many of our camp community folks in our camp community played an instrumental role in making this happen. This is our national economic impact study. So we really set out for the first time to identify and celebrate the economic impacts of camp. So I told you all about the developmental impacts of camp. We want to talk about the money part now. And we did that, but to do that, we had to do something first. And that was what we called a camp census. And by census, I mean literally a count of camps. Y'all, this has been my dream for so long. We really have been somewhat hamstrung in the research we can do on camps without understanding the population of camps that exist. So to do this, we again found great research partners, not us, but in this case, we partnered with the Economic Growth Institute at the University of Michigan. And they set out on a census, and to do this, they I can't even tell you the extent to which the different ways that they gathered the counts of camps.
Yeah.
They did not go knocking on doors, but everything short of that, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of public records requests and, IRS tax determinations. And through that, were able to give us a new number of camps in the United States. My
Wow.
world, this is like the most exciting statistic or number I've maybe ever had.
We're with you.
For context, I'll say up until now, we've had at best a guess, kind of based on some really rough, like back of a napkin spitball kind of stuff that we got from the Department of Labor years ago. And so I've always said, oh, this makes me so nervous that we're saying, but for years we've been saying there are approximately 15,000 camps in the United States. Well, now we know with certainty that there are over 20,000 camps in the United States. And so not only do we have a
Wow.
number we can feel good about, but the number's a big one. So exciting number. Really glad for that. That really gives us, talk about a call to action. Now we know where our work is to really grow, understand, invite in, and support those much larger number of camps that exist in the U.S. That report will be released publicly kind of beginning of June, along with, it's a 400-page report, y'all, but summaries and webinars and different ways to support how you can use that report. Yeah. So stay tuned.
Start reading. Thanks for that, Laurie. Thank you again, Laurie. Jake, thank you for letting me sit back and listen, just like our listeners. And I'm hearing this good work, hearing this good news, and we're grateful for what you're doing, the good work you're doing, both of you, all of you, and all that you shared. So thank you to our listeners. Thank you for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/sacredplaygrounds or at Sacred Playgrounds on Instagram. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you're getting this podcast. And if you like this content and it's helpful, you can support the podcast by clicking that support button. Our theme music was written and performed by Taylor Wilson. You can find all his original songs wherever you get your music. Learn more about what we're up to and connect with the team at sacredplaygrounds.com.